What's up, y'all? So with the end of the Super Bowl and the draft order finally being set, it makes sense to do the first mock draft of the season. So I think pretty clearly the first overall pick is going to be Caleb Williams. The Bears have said they're not going to trade out of this pick without a historic offer, and it really doesn't make any sense for them to use this pick on anyone other than Caleb Williams. Clear generational QB prospect. I'll get into him more when I actually do a full video breaking down the quarterbacks, but yeah, this should be the slam dunk, pretty obvious pick. It does leave the question of where Justin Fields would go, and I believe he's probably, at least in this mock draft, going to be traded to Atlanta for a third-round pick in this draft and a conditional second in next draft, which sort of like the Calvin Ridley trade with Jacksonville and Atlanta. If Fields has a really good season and they extend him in Atlanta, then that's a first-round pick. And then with the second pick, I think the Commanders are going to take Drake Maye, clear-cut number 2 QB in this class, although I do think the gap between him and Jayden Daniels is pretty minimal. But I think Maye is very good quarterback prospect. Again, I'll get into more detail on these guys in the actual breakdown videos by position, but I think Washington should be very happy to pick him. And then third, the Patriots, I think, will pick Jayden Daniels. Again, all these top 3 QB prospects are very good. I think that they're pretty clearly going to end up being very high-quality starters in the league. I really don't think there's much of a bust potential with any of them, so I think this is a pretty good pick for New England. Now, with the third overall pick, I have the Cardinals picking Marvin Harrison Jr., number 1 wide receiver prospect in this class. Obviously a generational receiver prospect in many people's eyes. Arizona definitely needs a sort of alpha outside wide receiver who can be a true number 1 with good size, good speed, good everything, just truly a legitimate outside receiving threat, which they really haven't had since they got rid of DeAndre Hopkins. And then the Chargers are going to take Malik Nabers, another really good receiving prospect. I think the gap between him and Harrison is pretty minimal, and some NFL scouts even have Nabers over Harrison apparently, which is surprising but not unwarranted. The deep speed is amazing. Finally gives Justin Herbert a legitimate deep threat that he can use, especially given the fact that either Keenan Allen or Mike Williams is pretty likely to leave by next season, and either way, I don't really know if you want to try to trust Quentin Johnston to be your number 3 receiver. And then with New York, I think the pick here is also pretty clear-cut. Joe Alt, generational tackle prospect. This class at the top of it has a lot of really, truly elite prospects in it. Alt fixes pretty much immediately your issue with Evan Neal at right tackle. The only reason I could see you not making this pick is if you don't believe that Evan Neal is a complete bust at this point. But I mean, at this point, it's probably not a good option at all to keep him. Then 7th, I have the Tennessee Titans picking Fashanu. This is definitely not a consolation prize at all. Fashanu is pretty much the 1B tackle here. Just another very dominant prospect. Should fix the Titans' pretty terrible offensive line woes at least a little bit. That Andre Dillard signing did not work at all. And like Nicholas Petit-Frere is not going to be a long-term starter for you either. So this should give Will Levis a good blindside tackle so that he can actually have time in the pocket when he wants to throw this year. And then Atlanta, I have picking Jared Verse. A lot of people are going to have Dallas Turner here, but I actually have Verse as edge 1. The only real downside on him is that he is a bit older than Dallas Turner, but Atlanta pretty clearly needs an edge. You can't really ride out with Arnold Ebiketie as your number 1 edge again this year. So I think it's pretty clear that they do need this position, and Verse is the best player at that position in this class. Then I have the Bears picking Odunze. Very good receiver out of Washington. Great route runner. Lots of talent there. Should hopefully give give Caleb Williams a really solid number 2 receiver along with DJ Moore. Not quite as elite of an athlete as Harrison or Nabers, but very technically refined player, should be pretty good from day one and develop very nicely. And then the New York Jets should be taking Taliese Fuaga, pretty clearly the best right tackle in this class. And I mean, if you watched New York last year, yeah, the offensive line was terrible. I mean, it was part of why Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles 4 snaps into the season. That and the MetLife turf being as bad as it is. Then Minnesota at 11, I have taking Dallas Turner. Edge isn't a huge need for Minnesota, but they don't really have a large amount of needs. I could see maybe picking a quarterback here. I could also maybe see trading down, but I think given Daniil Hunter is getting older and you don't really have a good second edge, like you did sign Davenport to a substantial contract, but he's never really been consistent, and he's also had a lot of injuries over his career. So I think picking Dallas Turner, who is a very good edge prospect in his own right, at 11 is a pretty clear-cut good decision for them. And then Denver, I do have Denver getting their quarterback here, Bo Nix. I just really don't buy into the J.J. McCarthy hype this high. I mean, maybe, but I think Nix has a lot of the qualities that Sean Payton's going to want for a quarterback, that being someone who's going to just run the offense that Sean Payton wants him to run, which was a large part of why Payton had issues with Russell Wilson. And so Nix is a bit older, but 24 isn't even that incredibly old for a first-round quarterback prospect. Guys like Joe Burrow have done just fine at that age. So I think this should be a pretty high-quality pick for Denver. And then with the Las Vegas Raiders, they also are relatively decent at most spots on the roster. You could consider going tackle here, but I think it makes more sense to pick the best interior prospect in this draft, Jer'Zhan Newton of Illinois. Just build up that defensive line and have Max Crosby, Tyree Wilson, who hopefully has a better second season, and then add Jer'Zhan Newton to that to hopefully give you a very high-quality starter on the defensive line for years to come. And then with New Orleans, they're also a team that's relatively deep all around. They don't really have any massively glaring needs, and I also don't think you want to take a quarterback here, given how much you're already paying Derek Carr and how much of a cap disaster this team is. So why not just take Brock Bowers, who's going to be very good, like basically guaranteed in the NFL. He's pretty clearly the best tight end prospect, at least since Kyle Pitts, if not ever. There's a pretty good consideration that he's one of the best tight end prospects ever to come out. And so I think picking him here just to give Derek Carr and then whoever your future quarterback ends up being a very high-quality weapon for a decade is a really smart pick here. And then with Indianapolis, it's pretty clear that their secondary has been a problem. You really wish Isaiah Rodgers wasn't suspended for gambling, but unfortunately for Indianapolis, that's not the world they live in. So Terrion Arnold, best corner in the class. I'm going to have him going here to Indianapolis to hopefully try and fix up that secondary. And then I am going to have my first trade of picks here. There's not many trades in this mock, I know, but I really think a lot of the teams are positioned pretty well with where they are. But I am going to have Seattle trading down with Philadelphia here, so that Philadelphia can come up and pick up Amarius Mims, who very good tackle prospect, and I think Philadelphia needs tackle long term. Lane Johnson's not going to play forever. And Jason Kelsey's probably retiring this year, which means you'll probably have to move Cam Jurgens back to center, which means you have a hole at right guard now. And since you have that hole at guard, Mims could probably slide in there for the first year or two until Lane Johnson retires. And at that point, you have what is hopefully a really good successor to him at right tackle. And then Jacksonville, I think the Calvin Ridley experiment did not work out at all the way they were intending it to. And they're still left with a pretty decent hole at wide receiver. So Brian Thomas Jr. of LSU, very solid receiver prospect, very good size, good hands, good route runner, good deep threat. So I think overall, you finally give Trevor Lawrence a number one receiver who isn't Christian Kirk, and hopefully they and Trevor can have a rebound season next year with this. Then for Cincinnati, their number one need is also pretty clear. You cannot, under any circumstance, let Jackson Carman and Jonah Williams be starting at right tackle for you. So J.C. Latham out of Alabama, another really solid tackle prospect, should hopefully be the right tackle of the future here alongside Orlando Brown, the left tackle. That finally gives Joe Burrow a real offensive line combination, at least on the tackle end. They still have problems on the interior of the offensive line, but Cincinnati's roster is also another team that outside of this one issue is pretty good overall. And then Los Angeles here, Los Angeles here, you're going to have the start of a run on cornerbacks here because this is a very deep cornerback class. And the first corner I'm going to have go in this run here is Nate Wiggins. Corner is a pretty clear issue for Los Angeles. Darian Kendrick isn't really a long-term guy. Akello Witherspoon's pretty old. They definitely have a multitude of needs across that roster, but corner is a pretty glaring one, and Nate Wiggins is a very good prospect of Clemson that should hopefully be able to provide you at least good number two corner play. And then next, the Steelers pick Kool-Aid McKinstry. You already have one really good young corner in Joey Porter Jr. It makes sense to just pick up a second one and have essentially just a great duo there for the next 5-10 years. McKinstry has definitely fallen off a bit in the draft process with his teammate Terrion Arnold emerging like he has, and McKinstry having some injuries in his last year at Alabama. But obviously still a really good prospect. And then Miami also needs corner. It's not an immediate need, and I could see maybe picking a tackle here, definitely picking a tackle if Terron Armstead actually does retire, which has been something that he's apparently been considering. The rumors around that have been there. So if he does retire, then I think you probably pick a tackle here. But with the current situation, Cooper DeJean is a pretty smart pick here. At the very least, he gives you a fourth corner year one at a position where they've had injuries. And at best, he's your long-term replacement for Xavier Howard, who's definitely getting older. Then Seattle, this is where they traded down with Philadelphia at. I think it's pretty clearly the best pick here to pick Jackson Powers-Johnson, very good center out of Oregon. Seattle's interior offensive line has been a massive problem for them for years, and this would hopefully at least improve that substantially. Center is definitely their worst spot on that line right now. I mean, Damian Lewis at guard is solid at this point. Their tackle duo, which was injured for pretty much all of last year, was really good in their rookie seasons. So this should give you a good young offensive line with 5 starters on it for hopefully years to come. And for Houston, there's a couple ways you could go with this pick. You could try to pick a wide receiver if you wanted. You could also try to address the offensive line a bit. But I think the biggest immediate need is to get defensive linemen. And so I have them picking Byron Murphy out of Texas. Murphy is pretty clearly the second best defensive lineman out of this draft class, interior defensive lineman. And the Texans really don't have many great players there. Like Malik Collins, he's solid. Tyler Tart, they brought in as well. He's okay. But, why not get a really good interior defensive lineman to pair up with Jonathan Grenard and Will Anderson, obviously, and just have a really great defensive line overall. And then Dallas, they need Keon Coleman. Adds a skill set that they do not have. They really don't have a third receiver to begin with that's all that great. And Coleman adds a skill set there that they don't have and they really haven't had in a while, of a guy who is actually very tall, can moss defenders, sort of the Michael Pittman type play, of a very physical, big receiver. You don't get that out of CeeDee Lamb and obviously not Brandon Cooks. And in Green Bay, we all know Gutekunst likes taking random Georgia defenders, but Kamari Lassiter is actually a really good corner in this class. So I think it makes a good deal of sense for them to pick him up. You do need someone on other than Eric Stokes to pair with Jair Alexander, and Alexander might be leaving this year also. So if he leaves, you definitely need to pick a corner here. And Lassiter's a really solid one out of Georgia. And then for Tampa Bay, Tampa's roster is also really solid overall. If Baker does leave, then obviously you would try to pick a quarterback here if you couldn't find someone in free agency. But here I'm going to go with Chop Robinson. He's one of the best edge rushers in this class, super athletic. Tampa is really in need of another edge rusher. Like, you have Yaya Diaby and Shaq Barrett and obviously Joe Tryon, who hasn't really panned out since being drafted. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, he hasn't really done too much for you. And Barrett's getting older. His production's gone down too. So I think it makes sense to get someone across from Yaya Diaby to be your long-term number one pass rusher. And then for Arizona, this is the pick they got from the Texans. I have them picking Darius Robinson. Their interior defensive line situation is terrible, and Robinson has really emerged lately with a great Senior Bowl. We'll see how he tests at the Combine and all of that. But, just really emerged lately in the process, and great prospect, hugely physically talented, played edge as well at Missouri, so you have some flexibility there in what he can do if you have like an injury to one of your edge rushers. This is sort of a slam dunk pick for Arizona. And then Buffalo's biggest need's pretty obvious as well. Wide receiver. Diggs completely fell off at the end of last year. Gabe Davis is probably not coming back, and Khalil Shakir isn't a good guy to be relying on as your true number 2 wide receiver. So I have Troy Franklin out of Oregon, really good receiver from Oregon. Really good speed, good deep threat. Route running's really nice. He's not the most physical receiver, but gives Josh Allen a real deep threat here and should hopefully allow the Bills to try and go on another run here. Then Detroit needs a corner, and Quinyon Mitchell is still here at Toledo. Another guy who had a really great Senior Bowl performance, along with really good tape out of Toledo. Toledo is a smaller school, so the level of competition he went against isn't as good as a lot of the other top corners in this class. But yeah, this should be a really nice pick for Detroit. Let Cam Sutton hopefully go back to the slot again, where he's. So wait, you can't really do that because you have Brian Branch now. I'm not really sure what they're going to do with Cam Sutton, but should hopefully give you a legitimate corner now, because their secondary was a really big reason why they lost that game to the Niners and didn't end up making the Super Bowl. And then for Baltimore, you need interior offensive line here. John Simpson and Kevin Zeitler, they both could be replaced. Zeitler because of age, and you never really know if he's going to retire or not at this point, because he is in his mid-30s at this point. And John Simpson's just he's okay, but so I have them picking Graham Barton here, best guard prospect in this draft, and should hopefully provide you an offensive line that doesn't fall apart in the playoffs. And then for San Francisco's roster overall is really good, and obviously there's been rumors recently that Brandon Ayuk might be heading out of there. So if Brandon Ayuk leaves, then you probably try to pick a receiver here. However, I think their biggest need, if Ayuk does stay, is corner. So you have them taking Ennis Rakestraw out of Missouri. This is an insanely deep corner class. But Rakestraw is really the last guy here who I have a first-round grade on, and should hopefully provide you a good number 2 corner across from Travarius Ward, because Diamador Lenore and Ambry Thomas aren't really cutting it there, unfortunately. And then finally, for the Super Bowl champion Chiefs, you need a tackle. So Troy Fashanu is the best tackle left. I personally think he projects better as a guard, but evidently a lot of the NFL believes he's a solid tackle prospect. So I think, replace Donovan Smith. Jawan Taylor's getting paid too much money to replace him, unfortunately. And really bolster that offensive line and try to get another Super Bowl ring and be the first team to three-peat this. And so that is the first mock draft of the season. I'm going to come back in probably like a week with a ranking of the top 10 quarterback prospects in this draft. And yeah, if you like the video, like it. Subscribe if you want. And thank you for watching.